Hi, everybody. There's no need to applaud. My name's Mark, and I'm basically a script editor by trade. So what I'd like to do mostly today is basically talk through some story structure principles and then relate them at the end to short films in particular. So that's pretty much the objective, right? For the next couple of days, you're going to go out and make a short film. Is that right? Yeah, okay, cool. So hopefully this will make sense. So the plan is as follows. We're going to have introductions, a little bit of talk of the core principles of storytelling, talk about the protagonist and story shape, examples in shorts, and then common issues and questions at the end. Okay? So just a little bit about me. I'm Mark. I'm a script editor and a story consultant and a reader and all-around story structure nerd, basically. In 2019, 2020, I completed a master's in screenwriting. Since then, I started my own podcast, basically, because I learned a lot in this, but I felt like I still didn't know enough. So I kind of regarded this as my own kind of PhD, basically, sort of trying to teach myself as much as I possibly could about film, essentially, and especially writing film and story structure and stuff like that. Basically, off at the back of that, I became a reader for the Abbey Theatre and then reader for production companies and producers. I started working as a story consultant for writers, so kind of first off, mostly kind of friends and friends of friends, and then beyond that. And then I became a script editor for production companies and producers, and kind of along the way, I've been a teacher and coach for a few different places as well. So that's me. There's one other thing that I'd like you to know about me as well, and that is that I would like to see filmmakers make more His Girl Fridays. Okay, so what I mean is this is a film, His Girl Friday, that I love, and I would adore if they would make more of them. Okay, they haven't made them in a long time. So what I'd like you to do now is I'm going to put you into groups, and I'd like you to tell your group a little bit about you and an example of a film that you would like to see someone make. Okay, so I'm going to put you into groups of 4, I think. So we'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, you 4 together. 1, 2, 3, 4, you 4 together. 1, 2, 3, 4, you 4, and we've got 5 here. Okay, 5 here. Okay. Actually, sorry. No, what I'll do is I'll put you 5 together in the corner. That'll be a bit neater, okay? So 5 there and you 4 here, okay? Now, one other thing. I'm going to give you some very expensive technology. Can I get one person in each group to please write down your names and the film that you said you would like to see more of? Okay? I'll give you a marker now. There you go. Here. Oh, what color? Oh, interesting choice. Okay. Blue or red? Excellent choice. Okay, so just a few minutes. Please introduce yourselves, say a little bit about yourselves, and name a film that you'd like to see more of. Okay? Go. Okay, cool, great. So just the reason why I asked everybody to do that is it's good for you to get to know each other, but also, generally speaking, if you kind of think of a film that you'd love to see more of, it's probably a good indicator of the kind of films that you would be interested in making. So it's kind of good for everybody to kind of get some kind of idea of, what other people might be kind of ideally making in an ideal world. We probably won't make Star Wars this weekend, but I just want to get this out of the way so I'm not constantly referring to them throughout. But these are some main sources that I use, just if you're interested in looking them up afterwards or anything like that. So these are screenwriting books over here. Into the Woods by John York is something of a Bible of mine. I also love Story by Robert McKee. But I actually love the online resources. These are great, and they're really easy to access. Script Notes, episode 403, How to Write a Movie, very specific. It's brilliant. It's a podcast episode. You'll be able to find it on YouTube now. It's 40 to 45 minutes long. It's about as good as anything I've ever read, basically, in terms of just breaking down what a story is and why why it works, basically. Pandemonium Inc. is Michael Arndt's website. He's got loads of really good videos on it. Michael Arndt is the screenwriter of Toy Story 3 and what was the film he wrote before that? Little Miss Sunshine. And he's just really good at talking about films in general. He's also guested on this one here, the Screenwriting Life, which is a podcast by two writers from Pixar. And basically, I would also just say anything from Pixar, they're basically the greatest of all time, I think, at both telling stories and also just talking about stories, basically. So, story structure is not this complicated, okay? This is something I think I got from Into the Woods, where he kind of puts all of the different, well, not all, but a lot of the different kind of theories together. And it's a lot, right? It's not that complicated, but screenplays are structure, right? And so basically, we have the basic 3-act structure, Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. And then it's just a matter of how much we want to complexify that, or how much kind of deeper we want to go with that, right? So 5-act structure is very popular. Into the Woods, John York uses this a lot. Something that I use a lot, and we'll be talking through a little bit here today, is the 8 sequence or the 8-stage structure. But again, I just want to point out that it's the same thing, okay? It's all the 3-act structure or the 5-act structure or the 8-stage structure, whatever. It's all the same thing. It's just however you want to think about it, okay? The other thing as well is I'm going to send these slides to Philip. I don't know if you can organize to share them out just so you're not taking photos all the time. By the way, also, please feel free to ask questions whenever, okay? So just shoot the hand up or just whatever, stop me in some way. So the question is, why do stories have a common shape? Why do we have a 3-act structure? So stories are about change, okay? So that change or ultimate non-change sometimes means something, okay? That's why endings define stories. Okay, so I've got a good friend of mine, Hugh Travers. He's a screenwriter. And basically, the first time I ever gave him a screenplay of mine, he was kind of giving me feedback on it. And just off the cuff, he came up with this example. And I was like, oh my God, that's really good. Somebody should say that somewhere important. So basically, he just said to me once, like, okay, so imagine there's this story, right? Where there's this village off in the middle of nowhere. And then a dragon attacks, right? And destroys the village. And then basically somebody decides, okay, I'm going to take on the dragon. And they train and train and train and train. And then they go fight the dragon. And they win. That is a story about heroism or hard work or bravery or something like that, right? But if you have the exact same story and the guy goes and fights the dragon and he gets charred within 5 seconds, then that's a story about hubris, you know, or foolishness or knowing your limits or something like that, right? So the ending defines what the story is about. Okay, so endings define stories. It's really important. And I think not enough people kind of think about that. It's why I heard a piece of advice recently. I can't remember where, but somebody said, if you've got a few ideas for stories and you've got an idea for an ending for one of them, write that one because you'll finish that. You've got the ending. You know what defines the story. And all you need to do is work backwards from there. Okay. Yeah, of course, yeah.
Doesn't it, you shouldn't start until you know what you want your ending to be, because that will influence how you run it?
No, that's totally up to you. So they kind of say, there's a couple of different expressions for this, but basically they say there's plotters and there's vomiters, which is a really unfortunate expression. But basically there are people who need to plot out everything, you know, before they write word one. I'm a bit like that, or I have to have a lot of it figured out before I can kind of start. But there are other people that just go, right, I've got this idea, I'm going to start writing. And they find the story through that. So it's like, it's much of a muchness, really. It swings and roundabouts. There's advantages and disadvantages to both. You know, some people, I always remember John Swartzwelder, is that his name? The Simpsons writer? So he used to say that something that he found really useful was he would just write, like he'd basically stay up late, he'd write a draft really quickly. So that then he'd wake up the following morning and he'd be like, oh, somebody wrote a really bad script and now all I have to do is fix it, right? And he found that really helpful, whereas that would be my nightmare. You know, I'd be like, oh my God, like what do I keep? What do I get rid of? How do I fix this? So for me, it's like much more important to kind of have the formula almost, you know, before I start. But it's totally up to you and kind of how your brain works, basically, as a writer. And I would say that about everything here, right? So you can take it or leave it. If there's anything here that rings true to you, use that, ignore the rest, whatever. But it is totally, you know, these are just to basically give you some tools that you can use either at the start or when you run into trouble, okay? So what the ending means then is the thematic argument of the story, okay? So again, is it about hubris? Is it about bravery? Is it about something else? So how does a story make a thematic argument? Now, there's going to be some jargon here. I apologize, but hopefully it'll all make sense. So a great story personifies an idea in a protagonist or a main character and then challenges it. So if you want to convince people, make the argument and the counter-argument as strong as you possibly can. Okay, that's something I would really strongly advise. As a script editor, I come across this problem over and over and over again with writers. Basically, a lot of writers don't want to be too hard on their main characters. So they kind of go, this character is great. And like, if only they'd realize how great they are. And then one day they do realize how great they are. Great, you know, or they realize they can do that. It's like, we need the counter argument to be convincing. You know, you need to tell me like this person just doesn't realize how great they are. Or they don't realize that they can do this, right? What you want to then show is the counter argument, which is like, yeah, doing that would be really hard. And then at the end, when you still say the protagonist still can do it, even though it's really hard, it is so much better. It is so much more convincing. So I just want to stress that it's one of the biggest issues I come up against as a script editor working with writers. The argument and the counter argument have to be as strong as possible, okay? One film that I love to give as an example for this, slightly controversially maybe, is Fight Club. Because Fight Club is about somebody who just wants to embrace toxic masculinity because he's afraid of women. And he's trying everything to embrace the counter-argument. And the counter-argument is made as strongly as possible. Look how cool Tyler Durden is. Look at how, you know, much he's unfazed by things. You know, how great it would be if we just didn't have to feel emotions. All of these things, right? And still, despite that, the argument is proven at the end. That as much as the protagonist was trying to be like Tyler Durden and embrace the counter-argument, actually his future is with Marla because he's managed to get over his fear of being vulnerable and his fear of women, basically. So that's a really good example of like making a really strong counter-argument, I think. Okay, so again, a little bit more jargon, but this is a quote that I love, one of many from Craig Mazin that I love. Structure is a symptom of a character's relationship with a central dramatic argument. Okay, so again, it's the thematic argument. So we've got our character, our main character, and their relationship to the thematic argument. And that's why we have our 3-act structure, which we'll get into in a moment. And this is my favorite quote, just about anything about screenwriting. And it's again from Craig Mazin. The purpose of the story is to take a character from ignorance of the truth of the theme to embodiment of the theme through action. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to take a character who behaves one way at the start, and we want them to embrace another way of being at the end. Okay, and that is how we have our 3-act structure. Okay, it's that making that journey. So one of my favorite examples of this is Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Has everybody seen that? Yeah. Okay, a bit of a mixed bag, but let me see if I can quickly show you here.
Let's watch the film.
Yeah. We've got 90 minutes. Okay, hang on. Okay. So, some people have not seen this. Is that correct? Yeah, okay. So I'm going to ruin Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade for you, okay? Now, this is an example where the protagonist, the main character, Indiana Jones, is not actually the person who needs to change. But there is a person who needs to change in the story. And in this case, that is Indiana Jones's father. Okay? So this is how he starts off. Here we go. So this is a young Indiana Jones going and asking his father for help because he's basically discovered some criminals up to no good.
Dad! 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 It's important.
Wait. Count to 20.
No, Dad, you listen.
Junior!
1, 2, 3, 4.
In Greek.
Ena, Dio, Thea. Tessida, Dente.
May he who illuminated this illuminate me.
Okay, what's the problem? Yeah? Anything else? He has more focus on his work. Yeah. So he's not communicating with his son, and he's not interested in communicating with his son, right? And he even makes his son speak in a different language, right? So he's there like, Dad, I found this thing. And he's like, don't talk to me, I'm busy. And then he starts trying to speak in English. He goes, count to 10 in Latin, okay? So he's not even speaking his son's language, right? So that's where the story starts off. And this is where it ends in terms of his journey, okay?
It's ours, Indy. Yours in blank.
Elsa, don't cross the seal. The knight warned us not to take the grail from here. Elsa. Elsa. Your other hand, honey, I can't hold you.
I can reach it. I can reach it.
Elsa, give me your hand. Give me your other hand. Junior, give me your other hand. I can't hold on.
I can get it. I can almost reach it, Dad. Indiana. Indiana. Let it go.
Okay. So you can see the change in the character, right? What's he doing now? Pardon?
Cares about his son.
Yeah, well, he probably cared about his son all the time. But he's actually, putting his son over the grail. The whole time he's been searching for the grail, it's literally within his son's reach. He can touch it. And he goes, let it go. It's not important. But more than that, at the start of our film, however long, 90 minutes ago, whatever, he was literally like, don't talk to me. Now speak in Latin, okay? Now, he stopped calling him Junior. He softens his voice to talk as a father to his son, and he calls his son by the name that his son wants to go by.
Indiana.
And because he's talking to his son on his son's own terms, then Indiana snaps out of it. He goes, actually, yeah, I'm going to let this go and I'm going to reach up and hold hands with my father. Okay? That is storytelling. It's great. It's so perfect. I love this film because it does that so well, right? And so another point that I want to make with this is that I will say here, right, it's embodiment of the theme through action. That doesn't necessarily mean that it can't be through dialogue, right? Action is just, it means it's doing something, right? But it could be the way you say something, or it could be what you say, the fact that you finally do say something, okay? So it doesn't mean that you necessarily have to actually be jumping or something like that, okay? So I love this quote, and I love The Last Crusade as an example of it, okay? So that's really your ideal, okay? Something that you want to do. Okay, so one more quote. I love a good quote. So we cannot ask which is more important, structure or character, because structure is character, character is structure. Okay, now this is something that I like to say as defense, because a lot of people complain about story structure and they say, oh, you know, I don't want to be told that I have to do something by page 5 or whatever. It's like, that is not what structure is, okay? Structure is this character revelation, basically. So true character is revealed in the choices a human being makes under pressure. The greater the pressure, the deeper the revelation, the truer the choice to the character's essential nature. So what we want to do is we want to take a character on a journey from start to finish, and we want to reveal their true character by applying greater and greater pressure on them throughout the story to reveal who they truly are. Okay? Okay. Does anybody have any questions? Is that okay so far?
Yes. Do you write when it becomes more character or story?
So again, I would basically think of it as the same mostly, but generally speaking, again, it's whatever. I'm always quite curious in like what prompts a writer. So like I know some people that are like, they're mostly interested in like a setting. They're like, oh, wouldn't it be cool to like set something in Alcatraz or something like that? And then they kind of find the story from there. I know like, I'm always fascinated by James L. Brooks, you know, who wrote like Terms of Endearment and Broadcast News. He really starts with the characters to the extent where he's like, I don't know where this is going, but I'm going to just spend time with the characters until I find a story. And it could take him years. I have no idea how he does that. Where I'll often kind of think, like, oh yeah, there's a character who'd be like this, and then wouldn't it be ironic if kind of they ended up like this or something like that? Irony is a really useful tool for kind of coming up with ideas, I think. Okay, so basically this thematic argument, we can pretty much also call it a need, okay? Because we don't really want to say, oh, the character is moving towards their thematic argument. Generally speaking, we can say they're moving towards their need, right? So their need is the human quality or piece of wisdom that the character lacks at the beginning of the story. Or if you want, you could say they have a flaw. So at the start of the story, they have a flaw and they need to overcome it. So it depends if you kind of want to phrase it, you know, positively or sort of inverting a negative as such. So the need will either be embraced or not at the end of our story. Most of the time it is embraced, whether it's a positive or a negative. It's really depressing. Always really, really depressing if a need is not embraced at the end of a film. There's not many examples of it, really. I'm trying to think, if anybody's seen Grave of the Fireflies, maybe the most depressing film I've ever seen. Like that's one where like just nobody gets what they need. And it's really bleak. And tragically as well, like the reason why it's so bleak as well is because it's really convincing. You go like, oh my God, that's really depressing. And also I completely think it's true. So yeah, anyways, thankfully it doesn't happen too much. So you're going to start here one way, and then here at the end, they're going to embrace their need. Okay, so these are kind of the poles of the need. So we're taking the character from ignorance to embodiment of the theme of the thematic argument, even. So our 3-act structure is actually before, journey of change, and after. That's why we have 3 acts, okay? So it's not just a beginning, middle, and end. You know, I kind of used to find this kind of frustrating when I was sort of younger. It'd be like, a story's got a beginning, middle, and end. Got it? Good. Okay. So it's a beginning, a middle, and end because it's a before, a journey of change, and after. Okay? And so this is our 3-act structure. And again, if we go with 5 acts or 8 sequences or stages, it's just adding complexity. But it's still that basic 3-act structure. Beginning, middle, and end, before, journey of change, and after. Okay? So Act 1 is before the change. So we have an opening. We define who our protagonist is and their way of life. And then we have our inciting incident. So the inciting incident is the event without which our story as it is would not happen. And this disrupts that way of life. So for example, if you want to watch Jaws or something like that, right? Brody is the police chief in Amityville. Is it Amityville he's on? Amity Island. Thank you. And yeah, so he's recently moved there. He's bedding into the community. That's life as it is. But the inciting incident actually happens right at the start. That is that Jaws, the shark, attacks and kills somebody. And basically it takes a few minutes, like maybe 10 or 15 minutes for that news to reach Brody. But that is the inciting incident. That's the thing that's going to upend his life, right? So he, at the start of the story, is somebody who's afraid and he's going to have to face his fear. So when we meet him, he's up in his house on the 2nd floor. You can see the water off in the distance. He is afraid of water. He will not go out on the water. At the end of the film, he is literally lying about that far away from the surface of the ocean, and he's aiming a gun at a shark coming right for him. So he's embraced his fear. He's had to face up to it, right? But the inciting incident is the thing that causes that change to occur, right? They've got a way of life, and this causes them to change that way of life. So the protagonist chooses to go on a mission, normally to get back their old way of life initially. And that's our 1st act. So we've got life as it is and our status quo disrupted. Those are the 2 things that are going to happen in our 2nd act, or 1st act rather. So then between the 1st act and the 2nd act, we've got the protagonist's objective. So normally about 25 minutes in, it could be 20 minutes in, it could be 30 or 35 minutes in, but it's normally 25-ish. The protagonist decides on a want. The want is what the character is trying to achieve in the middle of the story, from the moment they really begin their journey until the moment they are at their most defeated. As such, it is normally, not always, but normally a SMART goal. So it is specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. Okay? So it's often referred to as some version of an external goal or objective. Again, doesn't matter whatever term you want to use, whatever makes sense to you, okay? But again, normally here, they'll decide to do something, right? And they will have either achieved or not achieved it here at the end of the long 2nd act, or at the end of Act 4 if you want to use a 5-act structure, okay?
What's the difference between this and the need that you got before?
Okay, excellent question. So basically, the need is kind of like more of a emotional need, right? It's like a piece of wisdom that they haven't learned, right? And they need to learn. Whereas the want is much more of an external goal, right? So let's say, for example, we'll take Star Wars, okay? Has everybody seen Star Wars: A New Hope?
Yeah.
Can I get a show of hands? Everybody has seen it? All the men have seen it. Okay. I haven't watched Harry Potter. I think I need to update my references. I think the first Harry Potter film is probably the film that everybody has seen now. Yeah. Okay. What about Groundhog Day? Strong nod. Okay. So more people have seen Groundhog Day. So Phil Connors, what's the problem with Phil? Huh? He's a jerk. Yeah. Yeah. Pretty much name it. Like he's cynical, jaded, unhappy, all of those things. Yeah. Or he's just a jerk, or he's really selfish, or he's probably ungrateful, or he's an ingrate, right? Like that's probably the biggest thing about Phil. It's just like he just thinks he deserves all this. He's got this really easy job, and he's, whatever. He's a jerk. And then at the end, he learns to be grateful, right? And that's the big change in Phil, that he's ungrateful, grateful. So he even says at the end, he's leaving right at the start. There's that great thing where he's like reporting the news on the TV channel, and he's going, so I'm off to Punxsutawney, and the anchor goes, you must love it there, Phil. This is your 3rd year, right? And he goes, 4th, Nan. And then he's like, I'm going places. I'm going to get out of here. But then at the end, he actually says to Rita, like, let's move here. Right? He loves the town so much. He's just so grateful for this town that he's spent almost an eternity in, right? So that's his need. He's gone from ungrateful to grateful. But that's not his want. That's not his objective. So his objective...
Is it objective means more materialistic or something like that?
Yeah. It's tangible. Like it's something kind of physical. Like you can say like a definitive yes or no. Has he accomplished this or not, right? So around here, basically, he starts repeating Groundhog Day. So you've kind of got your first sequence where he's going there and he's living the first day. And then his status quo is disturbed because suddenly he's living the same day again. He's like, this is really weird. Why am I living this day again? But the second act hasn't really started yet because he's just like, okay, maybe it's a crazy dream or whatever. But then the second act starts here because it happens again. He's living the same day for a 3rd time. And he goes, okay, this is not right. I need to figure out a solution. And so he's trying all the way through the second act to break the cycle, to find a way to break it, right? So he tries telling Rita, he tries committing suicide any number of ways. He tries all of these things. He tries anything to get out of Punxsutawney, all these things, right? And then eventually here, at the end of the second act, or at the end of Act 4, he gives up. He just goes, I can't break it. I won't break it. But because of that, he eventually achieves acceptance. He just accepts that this is his life and he's going to make the most of it. And that's what makes him grateful, right? So is that clear then what the difference is between the want and the need? Yeah, maybe? If it's not clear, please do ask me, okay? Or if you want me to give me another example, I'm more than happy to give it, okay? So I know it's a lot of jargon. I don't want it to be jargony. I want it to make sense. But I just want to basically put names on things so we can talk about them. But that's all it is. Yeah?
It seems that the not getting the want results in the need. But is it also equally often the case that getting the want results in the need?
Yeah, it can do. So one of the things that always happens here is basically normally we have a kind of definitive answer to the question that was raised here. So to give you a different example, I will give the example of Star Wars, right? Just because it's a very clear example. Here, Luke sees the message in R2-D2 that the princess is in trouble. And he starts off on his journey here to save the princess. Now, he is not, at this moment, he's not, I'm off to save the princess. He's actually going to go find R2-D2 who's gone missing. But then he gets this far and he goes, okay, actually, I am going to go and find the princess. We'll talk about that more in a moment. But here, he actually succeeds. He does save the princess at this point in the story. They leave the Death Star. But he still hasn't embraced his need, not yet. Because at the same time that he saves the princess, which is his want, Obi-Wan Kenobi, his mentor, who's teaching him, dies to save the day, basically. And so he's kind of got this false resolution here where everything seems like, it's like, oh, I'm never going to be able to become a Jedi, basically. And then until eventually he does kind of become a Jedi. So it could be that the want could be achieved or not. And then, you know, that might lead either way to the need, basically. Okay.
Just one follow-up on this one. Could the objective be internal though? So what confuses me is that if the need is, sorry, not the need, if the want is something like I want to love forever. So that's is that a need or a want?
That would probably be a need because it's more internal, right? It's more psychological, right?
And a story would be just about that without an external want. That's like.
So my initial reaction would be like, it's very tough, right? I mean, have you seen Past Lives? Oh, you should watch Past Lives. It's really good. Who is it? It was Chris, is it? You recommended Past Lives. So I love Past Lives as well. That's a film. So you've got, oh, what's her name? Nora, is it? Nora, okay. So Nora, we meet her at the start, right? And Nora is Korean, and she's living in Korea. And basically, her parents are moving to Canada. And so she has to kind of give up her life in Korea to move to Canada. And then once she's moved to Canada, she very quickly decides, I don't want to live in Canada. And she moves to New York to become a playwright, right? So at this point, she's in New York. She's living as a playwright, but she's still kind of got this memory of being a kid in Korea and how nice it was. And when she was a kid in Korea, she had a best friend, Hae-sung. And so at the start of the story, she says she has two objectives. One is to marry Hae-sung, and the other is to become a really successful writer. But these two objectives are kind of in conflict with each other, right? Because Hae-sung is not going to leave Korea, and to achieve her career objectives, she's not going to stay in Korea, right? So at this point, she's in New York, she's studying to be a writer, and she gets in touch with Hae-sung back in Korea. And they basically maintain a friendship through this period. It's very kind of hard to say that it's this like really tangible, smart goal, right? That, you know, like, is she going to be with Hae-sung or not? Because at this point, it's kind of answered, but not really. Because basically at this point, she's like, well, he's going back to Korea tomorrow, and I'm not going to go with him, you know, that kind of thing. But it's not that tangible. But you can still kind of go like, oh yeah, you know, this is the question. You know, is she going to be with Hae-sung or not? You know, and then basically she chooses not to be. And so at the end, she gives up her kind of the way she used to be in Korea, and she embraces her new life. Okay, and that is basically her journey. Yeah.
Would you say the need is something the character doesn't know they need?
Oh, yeah. Almost always. They do not know that they need it. And normally in the first act, basically, they've kind of got a coping mechanism, sort of like a way of life that's like, it's not perfect, but it's fine. And they often kind of have this flaw because it's like, yeah, this is my coping mechanism. This is how I kind of protect myself or whatever. This is, again, something that somebody came up with off the cuff at one stage, and I think it's brilliant. My old teacher, Mary Kate, said like her friend at one stage said to her, gave her the advice, never come between somebody and their neurosis, because that person can live without you. I think that's really good advice, right? So never come between somebody and their neurosis, because that person can live without you. So in Act 1, somebody has a neurosis. They have a way of dealing with the world. It's not perfect, but it's fine, right? And they don't want to change because change is hard. But then by the end of the film, they will have embraced that change, right? So Finding Nemo is a really good example of this, right? So right at the start, Marlin, almost his entire family is wiped out. And there's just one kid who's left. And he goes, right, no matter what, nothing is going to happen to this kid. I'm going to protect this kid, right? Which is not a perfect way of being, right? It's a coping mechanism for trauma, right? And that's his way of acting throughout the first act, right? He's just trying to make sure nothing happens to Nemo. But then here, something happens to Nemo, okay? Nemo gets kidnapped, basically, I guess, by humans. And so he has to go all the way across the ocean to find Nemo. And by the time he gets here, he has learned that he can't, just put Nemo in a protective shell. He has to let Nemo go out and experience life and take risks and all that kind of stuff, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, just a question about past lives, actually. Do you think the reason that it's a happy ending, I don't spoil it, do you think it's a happy ending because...
I think I did, so sorry.
Do you think it's because your man Ben is so nice? Like, do you think he was evil, like he was kind of...
Oh, yeah.
Clear, right? Do you think it would be the opposite way around? Like, I was so torn with that because he's so good there, and I was like, it's a happy ending that she stayed with him, But do you think it's
that's why
like that? It's nice.
That's a really good example of like what I was talking about up here. Oh no, I didn't realize I'd have to go back so far. Where did I have it? Here. So if you want to convince people, make the argument and the counter argument as strong as you possibly can. So Past Lives is another fantastic example of that, right? It's like she should be with Hae Song, surely. Like that's clearly who she's got this like really kind of rare romantic particular spark with. But her life is in New York, and she's got a life here. She's got a husband who's really good to her and like, who totally understands her and like accepts her for who she is. They don't quite seem to have that same spark, but they've got everything else. And it's these two kind of almost equal ideas really going at each other. And that's what makes Past Lives like not just a good story, but a great story. The kind of counter example of this I would always give is basically most crap rom-coms. It's like Matthew McConaughey and Kate Hudson should really be together, but he told her a lie for some made-up bullshit reason. And like, oh no, now she found out. Now they're not going to be together, even though they're perfect together. And it's just like, okay, fine. But like, it's not going to convince you that love is real, is it? Whereas if you have something like When Harry Met Sally, when they get together, it's so much more meaningful because the reasons for why they should be together and why they shouldn't be together are almost kind of, equal in a way, or they're both really good reasons, basically. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. If I'm just rambling, please stop me. You can see, I'm sure that I'm a very enthusiastic person for these kind of things. So, okay. So yeah, here we are. Okay, so I'm very quickly just going to talk through what the journey of change looks like. Okay, so just in broad strokes, we've basically got the first stage of the second act, okay, which is also why sometimes we divide the second act into 3, okay? So if you have a 5-act structure, this is why. The first part is going to be the first attempts to solve the problem. And this is the easiest thing that the protagonist can try to get back to the way things were. So, Sadiq, right? Yeah, so this is what you were saying, kind of like, do they always know that they have this need? It's like, no. In fact, the first thing they're going to try to do here is get back to where they were, right? So this means that they are going to refuse the call to their need in this stage, right? But this stage always ends here with the acceptance of the call, or basically their first unconscious move towards their need. So let's take, for example, again, Star Wars, really clear example. Luke, it's a really clear example because George Lucas based it on these theories. And so that kind of became like grounded in Hollywood. So anyways, sorry, I'll talk about Star Wars a lot. So basically he goes off, right? He goes looking for R2-D2. He finds R2-D2 and R2-D2 has found Obi-Wan Kenobi, right? And Obi-Wan Kenobi goes, this message, it's from the princess. We need to go save her. I'm an old man. I'm going to need your help. You need to come with me. And Luke, who's been on this farm and going like, God, I'm so sick of this farm. I really want to get out of here. I want to look at these twin sunsets and like go and experience adventure. He says, no. He says, I got to get back to the farm. Uncle Ben is waiting on me. So he refuses the call, okay? But then he goes back to the farm, and it turns out the stormtroopers have killed his entire family. So sorry about that, Luke. So at this point then, he has to accept the call. And he says, okay, I'm going to come with you to Mos Eisley and going to go and save the princess, okay? There's any number of other examples. I thought of another one there a second ago. Let's say, for example, what was it? Okay, anyways, doesn't matter. Actually, if you want to take past lives, then she starts talking to Haesong online here and reconnecting with her old life. But then it kind of gets to a stage where she's like, this is tearing me apart. I'm not living my real life here in New York because I'm spending all my time on Skype talking to you in Korea. So we need to take a break, and I'm going to go to a writer's retreat. And that happens here. So it's the first unconscious move towards their eventual need, okay? And it always happens here, which is why if you want to think of it in 5 acts, this is the end of the second act, okay? So at first they say, no, I'm not going to do it. And then, okay, I will do it, okay? So then that leads to the next part. So they've accepted the call to adventure or to their need or whatever. So the protagonist starts to move towards their need now. They're not willing to go they are now willing to go further than before, but equally things start to get harder. And so this stage ends with the midpoint, or the protagonist's first conscious move towards their need. So this is the all-important midpoint. I'm a bit obsessed with midpoints. I'm going to try and keep it brief. But I have given entire lectures on the midpoint. So just to be clear though, right? Things get harder here, even though the protagonist has kind of engaged with their need more, right? So say, for example, if you want to watch, has everybody seen The Godfather? Yeah? Okay, right. So at the start, right, Michael's like, that's my family, that's not me, I'm not a criminal, okay? And then he finds out that his father has been shot. And he goes back to the family compound and he's like, what can I do? And Sonny goes, you can sit over there. That's what you can do, right? So that's pretty much, he's kind of put back in his box. But then here, at the first unconscious move towards his need, he goes to see his father in the hospital and he discovers that nobody is there to mind his father. So he has to kind of take his father's trolley and move it into another part of the hospital. And then he has to pretend he's holding a gun to scare off the other gangsters, right? So that's his first unconscious move. It's kind of reactioning to something else, right? It's not something he's kind of preemptively decided to do. It's not like a huge step, but it's a step. And then from there, he's way more in, right? He's like, okay, I want in on the family business now. That was class. I loved it. And that leads to the midpoint. What happens at the midpoint of The Godfather? Yeah, he kills 2 people. And now that's his big moment of transformation, right? So he kills the cop and the head of the drug organization, basically, right? So it's a huge step towards where he's eventually going to be, right? In Star Wars, it's the first time Luke uses the Force. He's got the little droid thing that's moving around, shooting lasers at him, and he's able to actually block it with the lightsaber. So, what does the midpoint do? It's the pivot, it's the moment of change. It raises the stakes for your protagonist. It foreshadows the climactic action. So it's not just a what, but often a how. So for example, in Alien, the midpoint is the moment where the alien comes out of your man's chest, but then immediately afterwards, they shoot his body into space, which is exactly what she's going to do at the end of the film in the climax with the alien. And it's also a kind of tentpole, something big that happens at the center of your story and in the middle of your long second act. Keep things interesting. And then that triggers the honeymoon sequence. So having acted in accordance with their need, things start to go well for a while. But all the issues have not been addressed yet, and old problems come back to the fore. So you'll always see here, things are kind of going well for a while, and then not so well after a while, okay? Because again, things have not been addressed. So say, for example, in Sideways, that film, is it Miles? Is that the main character, or is that the main character's best friend? Basically, again, it's a little bit of a rom-com scenario. He's like getting on really well with this girl, he's connecting with her, and then she finds out he's been lying to her about his best friend getting married. So that's the break, right? Because they've got these old problems that have not been addressed. And that leads to the final part, which is the bridge to the low point. So this brings us to the end of the second act, where all is lost in our story. So the protagonist has or has not completed their second act objective, but more importantly, the protagonist no longer believes the counter-argument of the story, but the argument seems impossible, okay? So again, if you want to take, I don't know, if you want to take Star Wars, you've got, he saved the princess, but he doesn't believe he can become a Jedi. That's a classic example, okay? But you'll see this all over the place. This is, they have actually changed. They've made the change that they need to make, but they don't know how to use it yet because the problems seem too much to bear, right? And again, you'll see this over and over and over again. In The Godfather, Michael has been over in Sicily. He's been having a great time with his wife, who's like 15, but whatever. She gets blown up. He comes back. He's all in on the family business now, right? He's going to take over because Sonny has been killed. But there's actually a deleted scene in the film where he's with his father, Vito, and Vito, basically he's saying like, so when are we gonna kill everybody, basically, for the fact that like they killed Sonny and my wife? And Vito's like, we're too weak, you know, we're gonna have to wait. So here, Michael was saying, you know, my family are violent, that's not me. Here, he's like, so when can we kill people? And Vito's like, whoa, 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 Michael, chill out, right? So the main character has made the change, but they don't know how to use it, basically, okay? And that gives us our third act. So in the final act, we have a false resolution where all seems lost before finally the protagonist fully embraces their need and embodies the thematic argument of the story through action in the climax. So false resolution, true resolution. Okay, that's a lot. But that's why we have this before, journey of change, and after. Okay?
Do you think
Yeah.
in the comedy films or the dramas we have the structure, something like this?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. So say, for example, When Harry Met Sally, right? So, you know, here they meet when they're younger, and basically Sally thinks he's a pig and all of that, right? By the way, who's the main character? Who's the protagonist in When Harry Met Sally?
Right.
No, it's Harry. Harry is the one who needs to change and whose decisions gradually kind of make that change, right? So here he's like, men and women can't be friends, right? And then he ends up getting divorced, so his heart is broken. And he's like, at this point, if you watch it again, this was again something that like a tutor pointed out to me, and I was amazed that I had never noticed it before. At this point here in the story, Sally asks him out. She says like, would you like to go to dinner sometime? And he doesn't realize. He goes, oh, are we becoming friends? And she goes, yeah. Because, you know, she doesn't want to lose face or whatever. So Sally has actually asked him out here, and he just hasn't realized it yet, right? And it's basically going to take to here when they actually sleep together, and he goes like, oh, actually, I do have feelings for her, but I'm kind of freaking out because I have unaddressed issues, basically. That's the low point of the story. And then you've got where they're kind of fighting with each other and not getting on until eventually he does kind of learn to grow up and embrace their relationship. And again, the midpoint is really clear as well, because that's when they dance together at midnight for New Year's Eve. and they kind of have this real sort of quiet moment together where they're dancing together, and they realize that they have this real chemistry, and they kind of get really awkward about it. And again, that is also foreshadowing the climax, where again, it's New Year's Eve and they end up getting together. Okay? Okay, any questions? No? Just very quickly, there are two kinds of stories. All stories are about change, but in some, the protagonist manages to change, like Luke in Star Wars, or Michael in The Godfather, or the main character in Before Sunrise, whose name escapes me just now, or Fight Club, or Thelma and Louise. In all these films, it's the main character who changes. But you also have stories where the protagonist manages to stay the same, and in so doing, they change the world around them. So Back to the Future is a really good example of that, right? Marty is the protagonist. He's the one driving the story forward, but Marty doesn't need to change. Marty is actually kind of the change that the world needs, especially his father, right? So his father needs to learn to become more like Marty, right? And so, you know, we can see through the stages, like at the end of the second act, his father finally stands up to Biff and socks him. But again, it doesn't seem to have addressed all the issues, because he's made this change and yet Marty is still disappearing in the photograph. And so it's like, we made the change. Why aren't we able to solve this issue, right? And it's not resolved until the true resolution. Ferris Bueller is a classic example always. Silence of the Lambs and like loads of thrillers have this sort of idea as well. And then WALL-E, one of my favorite examples, and Alien, all examples of this. Okay, so just keep that in mind, because we're going to see some examples of it now in a short film. Okay, this is something you can study in your own time if you want. I'm not going to go through it with you, but it's just to show how it's the same, but it's just slightly different. Basically, one is kind of more about learning knowledge of the situation rather than learning knowledge of yourself or changing. Okay, Mark, but I'm making a 5-minute short on my phone in 48 hours. What does this have to do with me? It's a good question, right? So the character movement in a short film is smaller, but it's still there, and you still need this sense of change, or most often ironic non-change. Okay, so basically you could have this kind of crazy situation where all these things happen to a character and then they end up right where they were at the start. Okay, so either something changes or there's kind of this like, oh, I can't believe we're right back where we started. So you often have both of these in short films. But the core principles remain the same. You will still have a basic 3-act structure of before, journey, and after. Okay? So there will be an inciting incident. There has to be. There'll be an objective. There'll be a midpoint that raises the stakes, a low point or a false resolution, and a true resolution with a climax. Okay? Now, something that's really important in short films in particular, make sure to introduce the central tension or question immediately. Okay? You've only got a few minutes. Okay? You want to raise that question immediately. I mean, if you're making a short film that's like a 6-shooter, if you know that short film, that's like 25 minutes long. It's pretty much a movie, you know, just a bit shorter or whatever. You've got a little bit of a window there to kind of set up who the character is before he gets on the train and he meets this guy who's a psychopath. But generally speaking, with the short film, as quickly as possible, you want to say, this is the question. You want to put the question in the audience's mind and say, you know, this is what we're wondering. Can this happen or can't it? And then at the end, you want to wait as late as possible to relieve that tension or to answer that question. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay, let's see this in action. Oh, yeah.
How long would you, like, let's say you have a 10-minute short.
Yeah.
How many minutes would you take for introducing the character and then for the question of, like, the problem, introducing the problem?
Yeah, well, so I wouldn't like to be too, like, didactic or anything about it, but, or too formulaic, but, like, probably more or less there, you're kind of looking at kind of 2.5 minutes for the first act, 4 minutes or 4.5 minutes for the second act, and like 2 minutes for the third act, or something like that. But again, like I wouldn't say it has to be like that or anything. Like the most important thing I'd say is like that you need the shape of the story. So yeah, you don't kind of need something to happen by this exact moment or whatever. But we'll see that like story shapes tend to be remarkably resilient. So like that midpoint comes so often like right bang at like, if it's 10 minutes long, minute 5, say for example. Okay, everybody has still got their piece of paper, their magic marker technology? Yeah? Okay, cool. So either you can rub out the names or you can go to the far side. I don't really mind, whichever. What I would like you to do is just draw a line along the middle like that. Okay. Okay. Now, basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a short film. We'll watch it a couple of times, but we're going to watch the short film and I want you to think about what the tension is. And I want you to kind of basically, when you see like, oh, I think that's the end of the first act, or I think that's a midpoint, or whatever, I just want you to put a mark there and write a quick note, okay? And then as a group afterwards, you're going to discuss that and like whether you think it's the same or whatever, okay? Is that clear? Does anybody have any questions? Again, just to be clear, there are no real rules, okay? But it's not just the midpoint, just whatever. So if you go like, oh, that's the end of the first act, So now obviously, again, it's not going to be this kind of 8 sequences, whatever. But like if you go, that's the inciting incident. Or like, oh, this is the second act. I know it. I can feel it. Okay? Again, don't worry too much about being too specific or anything. It's just to kind of start seeing the shape of the story. Okay?
Actually, you made the need.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's say for now, actually, just the first time you watch it, don't worry too much about the need. We'll talk about that afterwards. But let's say the central question that is asked at the start of the story and is not relieved or answered until the very end of the story. Okay? Okay. So I've got a few short films here, but let's go with my favorite. Has everybody seen Presto? Oh, excellent. Has anybody seen Presto? Nobody. Okay, excellent. So this is, it's a bit less than 6 minutes now. It's going to be just under 5 minutes, I think. It's something like 4:45, something like that, right? Sorry, you at the back, you don't have any jig. There you go. I'll give that to you, okay? So the 5 of you can work together, okay? To discuss. Okay, so again, watch the film, enjoy the film. It's great. I hope you really like it. And just, again, mark down where you kind of go, oh, something happened there. That's going to be the midpoint. So for everybody that doesn't have the marker or whatever, you can just watch it and think about where you think, like, was that the midpoint? Whatever, okay? Okay, here we go. Okay, that's presto. So in your groups, please discuss how amazing it is. And yeah, like see if you can see the story shape in it, basically. Okay? Okay, discuss. Okay, so again, just see if there's anything you noticed the second time. And then also, important question, what is this short film about? Sorry, what is the thematic argument of this short film? Or does it have one? So, I'll give you a couple of minutes to discuss those, okay? So, what is the tension of the story? What is the main tension of the story? Yeah, so I'd say, well, those are two, but I'd say the main tension, right, is the carrot, right? Because the rabbit is our protagonist, and what does the rabbit want? He wants to get fed, right? So that is the kind of the main tension. And again, if you watch it, it's introduced immediately. Before you even see it, you hear the rumbling of the rabbit's tummy, right? Where's the kind of the bridge from the first act to the second act?
Stage.
Sorry?
Is it going on stage?
I'd say it's going on stage, yeah.
Or then knocking the door?
When the magician comes in.
We got to see the rabbit when the door knocked.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, those are basically the same thing, right? So he's just about to feed the rabbit. There's the knock on the stage, or knock on the door, and then he arrives out on stage. So that's the movement from the first act to the second act, you know, if you want to think about it those ways. And so again, this is 4 minutes and 47 seconds long. So when does that happen? It happens about 1.5 minutes in. So yeah, it's like a little under 1/3 of the running time, right? Makes sense that that would be where our kind of bridge from the first act to the second act would be, right? Any idea what the midpoint is?
No.
So the carrot getting destroyed would be a bit too late. So the midpoint, remember, in something like this, now you're not going to have like a big character movement, but it's where the stakes get upped, right? And it does a really clever thing in upping the stakes for both characters at the same moment. And that is here. So, yeah, so it's literally, and the rabbit starts emptying the magician's sleeve. So the magician is not going to be able to perform the magician's tricks. The magician is not going to be able to perform the show. And then in response, the magician abandons the performance to just come and get the rabbit, right? So things have, in that same moment, gotten harder for the magician and harder for the rabbit. Okay, so the stakes have been upped. And if we see, it's 2 minutes and 37 seconds in to a 4 minute and 47 runtime. So it's pretty much smack bang in the middle, right? So again, like you're not gonna have this kind of big character movement as such, but you know, you're upping the stakes. And this is really, really clever in how it does it, because it does it for both characters in the same movement, in the same plot beat, right? At the end of the second act, this is kind of a gray area, I'd say, but what do you think? Yeah, that's, sorry? Well, yeah, so I basically say it's like when they've kind of given up altogether on the pretense, and yeah, so he has kind of moved off stage altogether. So he's kind of destroyed the carrot, which is the objective, and then he goes and starts chasing the rabbit around the place. And then that leads to this moment where he's hanging, and that basically is then like the moment when he's hanging, that is the climax, right? And the rabbit is like, okay, I'm gonna go off and feed myself, right? And that's the false resolution. And then he's like, oh, okay, he's gonna fall to his death. I can't really have that on my paws. So he goes back and he saves the magician. And that's the true resolution, okay? Does that make sense? Yeah. So we've got the main objective, which is kind of in the second act, right? Which is to get the carrot while it's on stage, okay? Which is gonna be hard. And in the end, it seems like he doesn't do it, right? Because the magician smashes it, and then the magician goes and chases him off stage. So he has to go off in the third act and find his own food, basically. But then it actually ends up being like, oh, actually the magician was kidding, and the carrot still was there, right? So the want, or the second act objective, is the rabbits. What about the need? Or is there a need here? Oh, recognition, very good. So, so let me ask you this, right? Which character changes? The magician, very good, yeah. So, and as you say, he gives the rabbit recognition, right? So what is the thematic argument of the film, of the short film? Teamwork?
Teamwork.
Oh yeah, pretty much.
Power struggle.
Yeah, I'd say something like maybe appreciate, the people who work for you, or something like that, right? You could say teamwork, something like that, or be grateful, even something like that. I find it quite funny because this came out in 2008. I literally just found this out yesterday. It was released, it was shown before the film Up in 2008. And so this film about basically a lowly employee that needs to be appreciated more by his boss was released 2 years after Disney bought Pixar. I don't know if that's a coincidence or not, but the timing is kind of notable. Okay, so right, we've just got 10 minutes left. I'm just going to very quickly show you a very different kind of short film. Okay, just so, because this is a cartoon, it's also done by the greatest people that ever made short films. And this one's good too, but it's just very different. So this one's only about 2.5 minutes long. It doesn't necessarily kind of have all the features, but it might be sort of like something a little bit more like something that you might aim to make, basically, in the next couple of days. So let's watch this and analyze it again, just see if you kind of see a story structure in it, okay? So we'll just go quickly through this one. This one's called The Black Hole. Okay, so quickly, just discuss with your groups. Did you see any kind of structure stuff in there? What was the tension? All that kind of stuff. Okay, so just a couple of minutes, chat about that now. Ooh. Pardon? Oh my God. What's going on subconsciously there? I don't know. That's literally like, yeah, a complete coincidence. Okay, sorry, we're almost out of time, so I better just quickly go through this with you. So let me just, I'll lower the volume and we'll just talk about it a little bit, right? So this is about 2.5 minutes long, more or less, this short. And one thing that really stands out to me here is the 5-act structure, if you want to use it that way, right? So if you notice here, we've pretty much got the first 30 seconds where we're setting up this guy, right? Seems pretty miserable, probably doesn't have much money, right? And doesn't have too much direction either. And then next thing, 30 seconds in, he discovers this weird black hole. And that's pretty much the end of our first act, right? So that leads to the start of our second act. What's going to happen with this black hole, right? And so here we have the first unconscious move towards his needs. He discovers that something is up and something is weird with this black hole. And that's the next 30 seconds of the story, right? And so we see here at about 1 minute, he realizes exactly what the black hole does, okay? And that leads to our third act, where he's going to start basically experimenting with the black hole and the eventual need, right? So this is probably a story about greed, right? And what might happen if we got certain powers. So at the midpoint, 1 minute 15, he's gonna steal. So he goes, I want a sweet. And he goes over here and he steals a Snickers. And you'll see he pretty much looks evil as soon as he gets his hand on the Snickers, right? And then a minute and a half in, we enter sequence 4, where act 4. He decides, right, I'm going to do something really bad. I'm going to break in here, right? And then that basically leads to the false resolution of Act 5, where things seem to be going well because our eventual end is going to be bad. And he's making all of this money, consequence-free. Great, okay, so he's going to make all this money and he's going to walk away, except all of that money is not enough. And he keeps going back in. And so we end with our true resolution, where he goes into the safe, the black hole disappears, and he's probably going to die in there. I've minute 2.5. So there's your 5-act structure in a 2.5-minute film, with a midpoint, the end of Act 1, the end of Act 2, and so on, okay? Does that make sense? Any questions? So the big thing that I want to say to you is basically, people often think of story structure or story shape as kind of a dirty concept, right? But the big thing that I would always say is that story shape or story structure is the same thing as a character arc, okay? What we are doing is we're looking at people. We're looking at human truths, and we want to say something about the human condition. And story structure or story shape is just mapping how we say that thing about the human condition. That's why we have a first act break. That's why we have a midpoint. That's why we have a second act break. And that's why we have a climax. Okay? Okay, I think that's it. Any questions?
So if we have 2 characters,
yeah,
should they have common goal in changing?
So there's always one protagonist who has a change to make. And there, so say for example with Presto, right? You kind of had 2 characters. You had the rabbit and you had the magician. So in that case, it was a little bit unusual in that the rabbit was the protagonist. He was the one, or she, was driving the action. But the magician was the one who had the change to make. And the change that the magician had to make was the change that defined the story, right? So that was the thing that gave the story its thematic argument. So say, for example, if you watch the film Seven, so Seven's a good example of this, right? Very dark film, very hard to watch at times, but it's also really good. That's one of those films where people say, oh, who's the protagonist, right? Like, is it Brad Pitt or is it Morgan Freeman? Well, it's Morgan Freeman, right? Because he's the one that makes all the big important decisions, really, but also his thematic journey is the ultimate argument of the film. So at the start of that film, Morgan Freeman goes, this city is unsavable. I am sick of life. I want to give up, right? And that is basically his starting position. And then at the end of the film, he has seen this innocent couple, Brad Pitt and Gwyneth Paltrow, get absolutely destroyed by malevolence, basically, and evil in the world. But the final thing he says is, Ernest Hemingway once wrote, this world is a fine place and worth fighting for. I agree with the second part. And that is his journey, right? And that is the thematic argument of Seven. So even though there's these 2 main characters, the thematic journey is Morgan Freeman's, and so he's the protagonist. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Thank you very much, everybody.